Hi everyone. So let's get started here with natural deduction. Now I have here a little smattering of problems. All of these I've actually assigned to you. I just wanted to make sure that you knew the basics as you were doing them. I might add that there is an assigned reading along with these problems, and you should really do it. You should really make sure to take it seriously and read it thoroughly, because this is a tough unit and you need to really redouble your efforts for this one. Okay, let's get going here. The first section of problems that I assigned to you, it really is a proof that's already complete. The derivation is already done, except that there are no justifications for the steps. So 1 and 2, those are the premises or the assumptions. So they're already correctly labeled as such, but for step 3 there needs to be a justification for it, which we put off to the right under the assumption labels. So how did we get from 1 and 2 to 3? Well, hopefully by now you are realizing that that's just a conditional elimination. That just is, if you want to put it in Stoic terms, the modus ponens. So what we have to document here is that rule that we used and the premises that we used. So we used lines 1 and 2, and the rule is conditional elimination. Simple as that. Okay, where did line 4 come from? Well, it's a conjunction. Maybe a conjunction rule. So this one is evidently simply the introduction of premises 1 and 3 using ampersand introduction. So we took the A, we took the B from 3, we put them together with an ampersand. That is how that rule works. Okay, cool. Let's keep going. For this one, it's a little bit longer, but some familiar steps either way. Where do we get 3 from? Well, clearly A is in the conjunction above in premise 2, so we can easily pull that A out by using ampersand elimination. That's from premise 2. So the documentation is 2 ampersand elimination. How do we get B and not C? Well, the only other place where I see that particular expression is up in premise 1. It's in the consequent of a conditional. That makes me think that I used premise 1 to get line 4. That must mean that I used conditional elimination to kind of rip out that consequent from that conditional. But of course, if it's locked, because it's a conditional, we need the key. The key is the antecedent. Oh, and by the way, A, the antecedent, also appears by itself in line 3, which means that the rule that we used for line 4 is 1, 3, conditional elimination. 1 is the lock, 3 is the key, and 4 is your prize. Alright, and how do we get not C in line 5? That one's an easy one. That was just simply ampersand elimination from line 4. Okay, in the section after that, you actually have to make your own proofs. When I first begin my derivations, I usually just put the conclusion down at the bottom. That is what you're supposed to do. Ultimately, your goal is to derive their conclusion. So might as well put it there. I don't know how long the derivation will be. So if you're doing this on a piece of paper, I would just give myself, 7, 8, 9, 10 lines. Especially later on, you're going to see some pretty long problems. That way you can keep everything nice and clean and not get messy. By the way, that conclusion there is a conjunction. So something's already telling me, you know what? I think I'm going to use an ampersand rule at the end. But we'll get to that. So the very first thing is, well, if the conclusion is D and not B, I can already see not B in premise 1, so I'm going to dig it out right now. I'm going to use ampersand elimination from premise 1. Next, I'm already realizing again, I'm going to use an ampersand rule. I'll go ahead and remind myself down there, I'm going to use ampersand introduction eventually. All I need now is a D, right? That way I can combine D and not B. Well, I actually see it right there in a conditional in premise 2. For me to pry out that consequent from number 2, I actually need the antecedent by itself. Here is the lock. I need A or not C, the antecedent part. I need it by itself somewhere. Well, maybe you don't see how to do it quite yet, but here's an obvious step. Let's go ahead and take out A. We know we need A or not C, which is the antecedent of number 2. We need that. We don't have that yet. Let's take out A at least and see what we can work with. So we took out A, line 4, another ampersand elimination again from line 1. Okay, well, there is a funny rule called wedge introduction or disjunction introduction. And there it is. You can actually add, using a wedge, whatever you want. In this case, we're going to go ahead and add what we need. If you can tell, line 5 just is the antecedent from line 2. Now, to some people, this looks like a funny move. Again, wedge introduction is a funny move. You need to just get used to it. You can add whatever you'd like as long as you use a wedge. So there it is. We went ahead and added not C to it. Okay. Now that we have the lock and the key, we go ahead and dig out the consequent. Make sure you can see that line 6 just is the consequent of line 2. How do we get there? Conditional elimination, lines 2 and 5. All right, very good. Now that we have that, very simple. Line 7 is simply the combination using ampersand introduction of lines 3 and 6. There you go. That is your first derivation. Okay, let's keep going. Let's do some more problems. This one is, I don't know, maybe triple bar seems scary at first, but it really is not that complicated. Let's begin as always by just go ahead and put your conclusion at the bottom. It'll just make your trajectory a little clearer. By the way, it is a conjunction. Let's go ahead and just put down there that we're going to use a conjunction introduction at the end. That's our best guess right now. And while we're at it, I went ahead and dug out not H from line 3 using ampersand elimination. Why? Because in the conclusion, we need not H, tilde H. So might as well get it out now. We know we're going to use it. So there it is. I've put it there in line 4. Okay, now we need an F. Well, I do see an F up in line 1, right? It's right there. I could get it out of that biconditional if only I had a not G. I need that, not G. The only other place where I see a not G is in the consequent of a conditional. That's line 2. But to get the consequent out of that conditional, I need the antecedent. I need that D. By the way, there's a D in line 3. So I think I need to take out the D from line 3 using ampersand elimination and then use that to get the not G. So now look carefully. You can see lines 2 and 5, those are just the ingredients for conditional elimination. This is your bread and butter. Conditional elimination will be all over the place. So there it is, 2 the conditional, 5 the antecedent, and 6 the consequent. Lock, key, prize. Okay, now that we have the not G, we can dig out the not F using biconditional elimination, lines 1 and 6. And finally, we can say where we got the F from. It actually is already there for us, lines 4 and 7, so we documented 4, 7, ampersand introduction. And that's how you do this derivation. Okay. We move on to the next section. Again, this is now a completed proof minus the documentation. So what I would do for these is just write it out and give yourself space on the right to fill in all the labels. And well, let's see what's happening here. The way you want to figure these out, whenever you have a subderivation, you want to look at the line immediately after the subderivation. In this case, what I'm going to look at is that there, line 5. That's a conditional. That is a huge clue that tells you, well, some conditional rule was used. Is it horseshoe introduction or horseshoe elimination? Well, if it were elimination, there'd be nothing there. There wouldn't be a horseshoe. But we have a horseshoe here. It must have been introduction. And by the way, horseshoe elimination is not a subderivational rule. Horseshoe introduction is. That explains why we have a subderivation in front of us. So, let's go ahead and label line 2. It's an assumption, right? Every subderivation has an assumption. It's an assumption for conditional introduction. That's what it is. Okay. For subderivations, you can actually use any line above it, right? So maybe I should be more clear about that. You can use any line above it that's either in the subderivation you're working on or that's on the main scope. So the line that is to the far left, that is the main scope. You can always use anything above the line you're working on from the main scope. That's always okay. But technically, let's just say we're working on line 7, you wouldn't be able to use line 4 or 2. Those, once you're working within subderivations, it's like their own little local planet, and the only other things they can pull from are the global main scope things. So we'll see how this works out as we go through these. We want to see how we got line 3. Well, I actually see B and not D, which is line 3. I see it in premise 1, in line 1. It is a consequent of a conditional. By now, this should be pretty straightforward. That's conditional elimination from 1 and 2. Okay, where did I get line 4 from? That one's an easy one too. Just ampersand elimination. Good old ampersand elimination from line 3. And this is, we have to get used to using these subderivational rules. Whenever you finish a subderivation, you go back to the main scope, right back to the far left line, and you go ahead and say how you got there. You did use conditional introduction, and it was basically you have to go from the beginning assumption of that subderivation, which is line 2, through the end of it, right? That subderivation ends at line 4, so I have to put 2-4, signifying 2 through 4, conditional introduction. That's how you get line 5. Okay, with that first one out of the way, this one should be a little bit clearer. Moving on to line 6, what's going on here? Another subderivation. What do? I look at the line immediately after the subderivation to figure out what was going on there. It's a conditional. It must be the case that we are doing conditional introduction. Okay, for this subderivation, I'm allowed to use anything above the line I'm working on that's on the main scope. Okay, so for this line I can use, for line 7 I can use line 6, which is in the same subderivation, line 5, which is on the main scope, and line 1, which is on the main scope. So 2 through 4, those are done. You can't use those anymore. That's why we end that subderivation up there. So we're on line 7 now. How did we get line 7? Well, again, I see B and D in number 1. It's the consequent of a conditional. Easy as that. This time it's lines 1 and 6, conditional elimination. Line 8, again, straightforward. Ampersand elimination from line 7. That's how you got your not D. Okay, then we end that subderivation. It must mean we are ending a subderivation rule. That means we're done with conditional introduction, and it was lines 6 through 8. That's how that goes. Okay, last but not least, line 10. What is that? Well, it's an ampersand introduction use of ampersand introduction, lines 5 and 9. And now this may be the most complicated expression we've built so far. I just want to make sure it's clear. All this really is line 5, there it is, a conditional, and line 9, another conditional, put together as a conjunction. That's all that was. So that's how that one goes. Okay. Next section, now we have to make our own derivations, and now every rule is fair game. In the first section that I assigned to you, you only have to do basically the non-subderivational rules. You can get by with only non-subderivational rules. By this section, you should have practiced those plenty, because now you have to get into subderivational rules, so there's going to be a lot more things going on. So, okay, let's try to figure out how this one goes. We have A and B as given. We need to derive A triple bar B. Well, let's go ahead and just put it down there. By the way, because I see that it's a biconditional, I might as well say that I'm going to use a biconditional introduction. It's reasonable to assume, since I don't see that expression anywhere else in this formula, it's reasonable to assume what you're really doing here is you're putting them together yourself. That means you're the one doing the biconditional introduction. So I'll go ahead and use that rule there, or I'll put it there as my reminder that I'm very likely going to use that rule. Okay. Well, the next step is actually kind of easy, because whenever you do a subderivation, you go ahead and just copy out what the subderivation, there's a little change there, but I guess it's okay. Go ahead and copy out what the subderivation rule looks like. So what I'm saying here is, we know that biconditional introduction, it's actually two subderivations. In one of them, you go from the left to the right, and the other one, you go from the right to the left. So line 3 is the right part of the biconditional. Line 3 is the left part of the biconditional. Line 4 is the right part. Line 5 is the right part. Line 6 is the left part again. So this little setup, all it's really showing is the basic rule for biconditional introduction. You go from one side to the other, and then from the other to the one. That's what the rule says. So what I've done here is I went ahead and labeled the assumptions for biconditional introduction in lines 3 and 5, because that's what they are. And we have to figure out how we can get to line 4 and line 6. And if we can somehow justify those, then we are done. Now, typically let's work on line 4. Typically between 3 and 4, there might be any number of actual steps you can take. This one, because it's one of our first ones, it's an easy one. As a matter of fact, how can I justify line 4? How can I get that B? Well, it's actually already up there in line 2. That's simply reiteration of 2, just like line 6 is a reiteration of 1. That's actually pretty straightforward. What is important to note here, though, is that if you've decided to use a subderivational rule, it's good to just draw in the subderivations that you'll be using plus their raw ingredients, so that you can already have the outline of how it's going, and then you fill in the justifications afterwards. Okay, so how did we get to line 7? That's actually just two subderivations, 3 through 4 and 5 through 6, biconditional introduction. That's how that one goes. Now let me just do one more thing to make sure this makes sense. All we've done is shown that given these two initial premises, you can easily establish a biconditional relationship. So something to kind of, redo this one, really think about what's going on here. It's a lot easier to actually just fill in the subderivations and the raw ingredients and then justify things afterwards. So let me show you what I mean with one more problem here. Hopefully this one will be really clear. The conclusion they are asking us to derive is tilde b. So they give us premise 1, there it is, and I've already written tilde b at the bottom. Okay, it's a negation. Oh, so what do we do? how can we get a negation? Well, it'd be smart to look at negation, elimination, and reduction. Basically, the tilde rules. Look at them. So line 5 actually has a tilde, so tilde elimination wouldn't be the right one. If we were to use it, we would end up without a tilde. Of course, line 5 has a tilde. It must be tilde introduction. It must be whatever rule leaves a tilde on there or puts tilde on there. So here's what I was saying about setting up the subderivation. Once you've decided you're going to use tilde introduction, set up the subderivation. You know that you're going to assume the b without a tilde, and then somewhere in the subderivation you're going to get a contradiction, b and not b, a and not a, some contradiction, and then you can end the subderivation and slap a tilde on whatever your assumption was. So what I've done here is, because I've decided for line 5 I'm going to get there using tilde introduction, line 2 is just what I want in line 5 minus a tilde. So there is my assumption label, line 2, the justification is assumption for tilde introduction. And let's see now if we can get a contradiction. As a matter of fact, we can. If we already have line 1 as a given, and we have line 2, the antecedent of line 1, the conditional in line 1, well, there you go. Now you have not b from lines 1 and 2, conditional elimination. By the way, we can also now reiterate line 2. Remember, we can use in a subderivation anything above it in the subderivation or anything on the main scope above it. So line 2 is fair game. We reiterated it. And lines 3 and 4 are a contradiction. Our tilde introduction rule says that if you assume something, like b, and then you get a contradiction, you can assume that b is not the case. That means you can slap a tilde on it. So how do we get line 5? It's lines 2 through 4, tilde introduction. Okay, I know that's tough. I really think you should get on that reading pronto. You need to make sure that you understand kind of the mechanics behind this before you really start doing those problems. So go ahead and do that. Email me if you have any questions. I'll talk to you soon.